So, good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Parabellum. I'm not in the title, but General Capitini and President Madaluno will also be joining us because there are character limits you can use in the title, and I couldn't include all the names. Anyway, it's not just Operation Roaring Lion, but also Epic Fury, as the Americans called it. And in fact, these are two operations condensed into one, and we'll see with Lanzara that they are two completely different elements. Let's say the Americans handled the strategic part while the Israelis took care of the more tactical part. I'll start right away with something even a bit amusing because the first thing you come across if you do a couple of searches is the controversy about Crosetto being there. And while I was doing this, I discovered that Crosetto follows me. So greetings to the Minister of Defense. It's always nice. I don't think he was there, as some people say, because he didn't know or things like that. Honestly, I'm a bit harsher in my analysis, so I think he was there. Because what better time to pitch to the Gulf countries, maybe for our SAMP-T systems or things like that? Then, to be fair, it seems his family was there too. But it's also true that it was hard to predict that the Iranians would extend this to practically all the Gulf monarchies. And as we will see, there is a strategy. There is a strategy in this sense, and the strategy can work. But it can also explode in an extremely dangerous way for the Iranians, and we will see that little by little. In the meantime, I'll also add the president who just arrived, full black. Good. That's how I like the president.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Hi, Mirko. Hi, Leo.
I understand because I see the newspapers a bit and you can't understand anything from the way they tell it. Without a time frame, it's hard to understand. They say this one was attacked or that one, but nothing is connected all together. So let's give a time frame for now so everyone can understand. 9:30, 10 in the morning yesterday, first explosions in Tehran and several cities. So Operation Epic Fury and Roaring Lion together. Between 10 and 11, there were attacks against military sites, nuclear facilities, and the leadership. This was the Israeli side's responsibility. By the way, we'll also examine the B-2 Spirit's role. 11:30, 12:30, Iranian response. The missiles were launched first against Israel and then against the others. 12:30, 1:30, Trump's video on Truth, 8 minutes in which he says launch major combat operations and calls for the overthrow of the regime. 1:30, 3:30, the Iranians begin to attack Qatar, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Jordan. Then we'll also see Cyprus today, also the French base in Bahrain and so on. In the evening, new American and Israeli attacks, but this time it's different. The seed missions have already taken place, the suppression probably as well, a lot of electronic warfare too. So the Iranians were caught with their pants down. And that's when they started blocking the internet and threatening to close the Strait of Hormuz. This is the time frame. There have been other attacks from both sides, even inside Tehran again, in the government district and so on. Someone was wondering why they even bombed at one point an area that wasn't really that relevant. Narmak Maidan at number 72 to be precise. Well, that's Ahmadinejad's residence. It's not known if he's dead. Many say yes, but maybe the idea was that if he survived, maybe they would call him back as a replacement, even though there's a certain, let's say, but that place there, let's say, is known for being his house. So it's a bit strange that it was included in the whole series of attacks. Let's get to the actual analysis of how it went from a military point of view. Here, Lanzarone, it's your turn.
Good evening, everyone. Hello, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. So, a little necessary premise. Do you remember Midnight Hammer from 8 months ago? Good evening, Director. It has nothing to do with it then. We are not witnessing a targeted operation to hit specific objectives like the nuclear program, the Iranian nuclear project, like last year. Here we are facing a real war, a series of coordinated actions that started in broad daylight. which is a very strange thing, absolutely unusual, and something that doesn't happen. I don't remember the opening shots of one of our military campaigns, Western or American, happening in broad daylight with the launch of ballistic missiles. There are several videos. I guess Mirko will show something. So what we knew, what we saw with Midnight Hammer didn't happen again here. Here we are facing a much broader conflict, and the information coming in is also very different. That is, at the end of the bombings of the Iranian nuclear sites, which in theory had been completely annihilated and everything was supposed to be over with a few MOP bombs, massive ordnance penetrators, back in 2025. Here, that's missing. Especially communication is missing. Right after that major operation organized by the Americans to strike Iran with the B-2S, we saw a briefing with a lot of information. They told us how things went. It's kind of like saying, well, that's how it went. It's over. That's what we did. It was nice. Here, no. Here we're faced with much less information. There isn't any, especially from the Western side, we get much less information. They're not conclusive, and they start to arrive with a bit of delay, and they're much fewer, much less celebratory as well. We're really at the beginning of a campaign. Yesterday, we were at the start of a campaign that will last at least a few days, and today it's only the 1st of March, the second day, but it shouldn't end here. How did it go? Well, from what we know, everything started with the well-known launches of Tomahawk cruise missiles by the Americans. Then there's what we don't know, what we don't see, that is electronic warfare, which, in my opinion, was the main act. Really, it was the kickoff of this operation. I don't know. We don't have sources on this. We don't have data for electronic warfare. It's much less visible. However, before what you're seeing, I'm pretty sure there was a lot of electronic warfare work by the F-35 and the A-18G Growler, and who knows what else. I can also imagine that in Iran, special forces cells were infiltrated. Precisely because it has already happened before, not because I made it up, it has already happened. We know that the presence of infiltrated Israelis in Iran has always existed. It's possible that it's there this time too, but we still don't know. The launch of Tomahawks and then certainly missions to suppress air defenses opened the campaign, as is normal. And this is where the Chinese contribution comes into play, because it turns out that the Chinese have recently supplied something to Iran. We don't know exactly what, but several cargo planes have landed. Y-20, which are Chinese strategic transport aircraft loaded with who knows what. I can imagine anti-aircraft systems, electronic warfare equipment, but we could also think of military advisors, personnel, or even anti-ship missiles. We just don't know. It seems that among the Chinese assets deployed, there was also an anti-stealth radar, that is a radar.
In the world of electronic intelligence, among those who deal with this kind of information, especially open source intelligence, but specifically electronic intelligence, some signals have emerged. This is where Marco Bussi would be needed. Basically, these signals were associated with a particular Chinese radar, which is interesting because this forced the Israelis and the Americans to use a lot of electronic countermeasures that they perhaps weren't expecting. Not that it changed much because the Iranian strike capabilities were extremely low anyway, but it definitely was of great interest to the Chinese. They're there to collect data.
Yes, these are radars that operate on frequencies different from the usual ones, let's say. So there are anti-stealth radars, which are usually low frequency in the L band or at very high frequencies. At UHF, here it seems they used UHF to generate a heat source. I haven't quite understood exactly how these radars work, but it doesn't seem like they had much effect since the targets were hit anyway. The Iranian anti-aircraft defenses, I don't think they did much, also because they had already been greatly reduced since last year. Of course, the Chinese might have reinforced it somehow with their own systems. I'm guessing HQ9, HQ16, HQ17, which are the different ranges possible to create a bubble. But I'm just guessing. I don't know. To tell you the truth, it's not like I'm making things up. Certainties like Iran can't be attacked because it has the Bavar. I don't have those kinds of certainties. Unfortunately, however, the fact is that Iran was hit in this way. We're talking about complex operations because it seems that the United States and Israel coordinated their operations. About 200 Israeli aircraft, the Americans had more than 300 in the theater, with many refueling planes. I think I can share a little behind the scenes with our followers so they can have a laugh. We've been preparing this live about Iran for several days, and it was scheduled for today. Why didn't we do it earlier? Because we didn't want to be like other YouTubers who try to ride the hype and say, the attack is imminent. The attack is imminent. There are people who have been saying for a month or two that the attack is imminent. Actually, we were waiting for the completion of the American deployment, but this attack was in the air.
I'm an asshole. I said it at the end of February, but because it made sense. Because the deployment was complete, there were no more reports in the world of open source intelligence, no new tanker deployments, and so on. When, let's say, the train ends.
Yeah, something else still had to arrive. I was expecting it the next weekend.
Yes, it was either this one or the next one. Those were the two dates.
Yeah, I was leaning more towards the next one. By the way, the Tomahawk attacks were carried out both from launches in the Mediterranean and from launches from the sea, from the Arabian Ocean, so from the south. And it was all coordinated in terms of arrival times, so much for COMAO, the Combined Air Operations. Here we had the coordination of two nations, the United States and Israel, who managed to more or less divide up the targets. The Israelis were mainly assigned the target related to intelligence. And then Mirko will explain to you better why there was this rush, this acceleration in things. Attacking at 9 in the morning in broad daylight is unusual, but Mirko will explain why later. The Americans were assigned the strategic targets, so above the sound of air defenses, nuclear sites, rather than other military objectives. The intelligence part was apparently much more connected to Israel. And here the black part is big, but it's not what you think, because this thing you see is a tomahawk. Normally, tomahawks don't have this color. But for politically correct reasons, no, probably for reasons related to appearance.
I'm having a bad influence on Leonardo.
Yeah, I know, you led me astray, and you should see.
Nero, to remember those from Terror on the High Seas.
Damn it.
Now Steven Seagal is coming.
And what an actor, what a great actor with expressiveness equal to that of Nicolas Cage. This tomahawk, why is it black? Small and black? Well, it's not small, it's black. It's probably assumed to be because it's a radar-absorbing coating. It's a version that is thought to be related to this, and it shares this color with the LRASM. Long-range anti-ship missile, the AGM-158, one of the versions of the JASSM, it seems to be related to reducing the radar signature. And if Mirko moves down a bit, another possible innovation of this Tomahawk missile is the chin. You see that on the nose, on the tip of the Tomahawk, it's not round, but it's called a chin. I don't know how to say it in Italian. It's that little lip you see, that protrusion, the chin, that's what it is. It should serve to reduce the radar signature of the missile. You also find it on fighter jets, you find it on other next generation missiles like the Xiao, the standing aerial weapons SIAW. These are all studies they're trying to do to put missiles in the F-35's base. So they're not bulky, they have few fins, and these chins, these extended fins that generate lift and reduce the radar signature. Whew, I went too far.
They already fly low for waypoints, so I imagine it reduces it even more. You saw it, the videos we showed you, they all passed through Iraq. They were literally filmed by people. By the way, a small interesting note, 90% of the videos we see are almost all from Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, Iraq, Israel, etc. There are very few videos coming from Iran. There are about 20. They're always the same ones circulating more or less in the capital. There's a lot more video production elsewhere. Also because Iran has completely shut down the internet. And already in the morning, when at least they knew the missiles were in flight, everything in Iran was under jamming. So basically no information was coming out. Whoever did it must have used a VPN or had some kind of satellite connection. By the way, I want to connect this to a case that happened about a month ago, if I remember correctly, 3 weeks ago, where a Dutch diplomat was stopped by the Iranians with a briefcase with some Starlinks and satellite phones. Maybe it was a way to get them into the country to then give them to some members of the resistance. Who knows?
Anyway, to wrap up this part then, I imagine you'll go on about the targets that were hit, so I won't go on. I told you more or less how the American and Israeli targets were divided. What did Iran do? It did what everyone initially expected, that is, it counterattacked with its vast arsenal of ballistic missiles. Who? The usual suspects. Israel, but also Jordan, because the Salty base is nearby. It's in Jordan. In fact, you see, it's quite close to Israel, and it made sense to attack the American bases as well. But then there was a bit of a surprise because apart from attacking the usual military targets, the Iranians started launching pretty much everything they could launch in the Gulf monarchies, so even civilian buildings were hit. The Burj Dubai, just to say, is that sail-shaped building, that 7-star hotel, shaped like a sail that we all know. It's one of the postcards of Dubai. I believe something also happened on the Palm Jumeirah, which is one of those structures that...
A piece of debris from an intercepted missile fell on a hotel and caught fire.
Well, a piece of debris just goes, who knows, so we can't really consider it as an attempt. But they did hit... What was this?
Planes in flight that were trying to intercept what was happening here.
That's why we shouldn't forget that the Gulf monarchies did not take part in this offensive. Some of them even stayed out of it, tried to distance themselves from the so-called Western action, like the United States, Israel, which actually isn't Western. I was wrong. They tried to distance themselves, but instead ended up becoming targets. So it's understandable that they not only scrambled their fighter jets to intercept the various drones that Iran used, along with ballistic missiles, right? But then they also fired quite a few Patriots, a lot of air defenses. They tried to defend themselves. So the Burj Dubai wasn't hit directly. It was hit, I imagine, by a drone. If not, this looks to me like the impact of a drone on the outside. Fortunately, I don't think there was any major damage, but proper checks will need to be done. It could have gone much, much, much worse.
Yes, there have been many attacks in Bahrain and so on.
Listen to how it sounds. Listen to how Shahed sounds. And by the way, speaking of listen to how Shahed sounds, the Americans in their actions have used, because this thing goes around, the copies of Shahed, which are called Lucas. So the Iranian idea was so good, and we all made fun of them when Russia used them against Ukraine. But where do they think they're going with these $20,000 drones with a Chow moped engine? And everyone was making fun of them. We were making fun of them. And in fact, they copied them. The Americans improved them a bit, of course, as expected, just like the Russians with the Geran 2 surely improved the original Shahed 136. But the concept is the same. It's a very similar aircraft, the Lucas, and apparently it has also been used with decent success. Now Mirko will show it to us. Now tell me. And if this isn't a great Shahed? Very, very similar, proving just how good of an idea it was conceptually.
And on the other hand, many influencers, especially Russians, were complaining. The whole OnlyFans world, all those people, do you want to make millions? Look, I'm here with the Bugatti in Dubai. They obviously got hit by the same drones that have been flying around Ukraine for quite a while. On the other hand, the Americans didn't just use these, not just the Lucas, which are long-range kamikaze drones that are a variant, etc. But they also used a lot of dummies to create swarms that basically evaded the Iranian anti-air defenses, thinking that huge flocks of planes were coming, but in reality, they were just dummies. That is, fake targets with a huge radar signature, making it seem like the planes were coming from that direction. It's interesting to note, at least from a chronological point of view, how just a few hours after the first waves of American attacks, Reaper drones were filmed in Iran, calmly flying over, for example, the sky of Shiraz. This shows that there probably wasn't any more anti-aircraft activity. Here you can hear gunshots. They're basically trying to shoot them down by hand.
Best wishes.
And this means that when the Reaper drones can just go around like this and do pretty much whatever they want, there's basically no resistance. There it's stationary, it's moving 200 kilometers per hour.
It's also a way to test the defenses. Also, if they shoot down a Reaper, so be it. At 20 years old on your back, it's not a problem.
They shot one down a few days ago.
Yeah, then it seems they also shot down a Triton, an MQ-9. It seems that Chinese electronic warfare is really involved here. I was reading about these things too. Of course, everything we're describing now is part of a foretold tragedy that we were expecting. Because we had understood that the talks between the United States, Israel, and Iran were getting bogged down in a way that there was no way out, so we were expecting it, although we hoped it wouldn't happen. Because it means setting this region ablaze again, among other things, in blatant disregard for international law. Because what's happening, I want to make this clear. Because yes, I'm telling you technically how this attack happened. But we also need to keep in mind that all of this happened again, in blatant disregard for international law. Then, of course, a world without the Ayatollahs would be a better world. But it should also be said that this is an undeclared act of war. In fact, it is an act of war. We are witnessing war, yet another undeclared one, and once again in defiance of international law. And this, it must be said, goes beyond any analysis, regardless of how it ends. Why did the Iranians respond this way? Why did they attack almost indiscriminately, even targeting civilian airports? Civilian airports were targeted. Why? Either they've gone crazy and are firing at anything they want. But I don't think so. Or maybe they're trying to put political pressure on the Gulf monarchies who were probably dragged into this situation. Not wanting it from Israel and the United States, now they find themselves with deaths and destruction at home for something they didn't want. And I imagine they're also very irritated. So what will they do now? Will they protest to the United States?
Is this the Dubai airport?
Yes, here, the Dubai airport. Why was it hit? There was no reason. They're probably putting pressure on all these monarchies to convince the United States and Israelis to stop, to try. I don't know. They might risk entering the war themselves. Good evening, General.
Good evening, everyone.
Hi, Paolo. Welcome.
Hi, Paolo.
The risk is that with these deliberate attacks on civilian targets, you might draw in other enemies against, oh God. At this point, maybe that's just the risk we have to take. The Iranian regime is in such trouble that gaining 4 more enemies doesn't really affect them.
So let's break things down a bit, because then we'll get to who did what and what the American and Israeli objectives were. This, of course, is the part where Israel targeted the high-ranking officials of the regime, and why the operation was launched at an unusual time, because evidently they had sources on the inside. And so it was a favorable moment to strike where Khamenei was. No more, no less. That's why it happened suddenly. That's why they had been holding their position for 2 weeks and little new was coming in. Evidently, it was a matter of a target of opportunity. It's interesting how they managed to synchronize these attacks on both sides. Keep in mind that the missiles were in flight and the planes were flying behind the missiles with only a few seconds difference, meaning when the Israeli planes started dropping their bombs. Already the first wave of planes that had suppressed the air defenses and radar systems, were already ahead and were already turning back. When the missiles hit Tehran in the government district just a few seconds later, the planes meant to bomb had already dropped their bombs and were turning back. This kind of coordination, probably with over 400 aircraft on both sides, plus all the naval assets, so all the Arleigh Burke-class destroyers which launched, it's something you can only do with an enormous amount of coordination and intelligence work. and especially also satellite-based. Like there were various satellites pointed at the area. Starlink is probably involved too, since Elon Musk made some slightly strange tweets. So the Israeli goal is always to keep decapitating the regime, as we've seen they've done with Hezbollah and Hamas and all the others. For the Americans, on the other hand, it was a matter of destroying Iran's retaliatory capabilities. Why retaliatory capabilities? So this also brings us to the strategy behind the why. We see these attacks in Bahrain, in Qatar, in Kuwait, beyond the American bases, which suffered damage. We'll see it later. There are satellite images and so on. The main point is this: the Iranians don't have great missile capabilities. From the point of view of CEP, that is circular error, they're not very accurate, but they have a lot of them. And there's also a technical aspect. Why do they also fire at these countries? Because not all the missiles they have are capable of hitting Israel. So they try to widen the war. And why do they try to widen the war? Technically, it would be counterintuitive, right? They're already in trouble and they widen the war. Actually, I had the chance to talk with people in the business world who also have contacts from those areas, and they tell me that the Gulf monarchies are very angry with the Americans. Imagine a place like Dubai, which thrives on OnlyFans, which thrives on tourism and so on, where suddenly drones are flying around and so on. Well, people won't want to be tourists there anymore, even just for a while, because there's uncertainty. This strategy can work for two reasons. One, if they have to defend themselves, all the defensive systems they have are American. Pay attention, what you saw even in Kuwait and so on, their PAC-2 systems, etc. Two, they don't have infinite ammunition, so the Iranians also maximize the use of their older missiles or medium range or shorter ones just to make the air defenses use up their ammunition. Because they know that the Americans can't keep up this kind of attack for long. Second, it infuriates the Gulf monarchies, who will blame the Americans. Third, which is the most dangerous scenario even for Iran. But when you have nothing to lose, these groups might start to become active, not just passive. That is, they stop just taking American hits and start participating in the attack. For now, this hasn't happened. But one of the points that is most discussed, especially on sites that deal with these topics like TWZ and so on, is the fact that the missile reserves, the interception capabilities of these countries are completely dependent on the Americans, and they're not very large because they weren't expecting a major attack. That's why we also saw Shahed drones infiltrate, which, as one might say, how the hell did they manage to hit buildings undisturbed? So this is part of the Iranian strategy for why we're seeing this mess. Then lately, there have also been some attacks, as we've seen, on ships. An hour before we started the live stream, there was talk of a second incident involving a ship and even a third one in the Strait of Hormuz. So fill up your tanks, because we don't know how the stock markets will react to this story on Monday. Especially if Iran decides to keep, let's say, causing trouble in that area. Let Samson die with all the Philistines. Trump made a statement an hour ago. Out of 9 major ships, major frigates to be clear, compared to what they have destroyed. In fact, from the satellite images, you can see at least 3 of them. There was one, and now you can see the other 2 sunk. And it seems they want to completely wipe out the Iranian Navy's ability to cause any trouble in the middle of the strait. This is one of the incidents being reported. As you can see, 3 hours ago, there was a third one. We don't know exactly, but we'll find out in the next few hours. But if these incidents increase dramatically, as you can see all around the Strait of Hormuz, well, this strategy can also work to create a lot of trouble while we're at it. I'll also show you the ships that were hit, the satellite images that are coming out. Then we'll also talk about the strategy. If I want to do it, Maraluno, since they even wrote an article about it on a side over, I think it was Muratore. I don't remember if it was yours or Muratore's, but I went looking. Based on that, I went looking, and I found confirmation that it's well done. Here you can see one of the first ships that sank. This is the second, this is the third. Actually, there were 9 of them here, according to the previous images. They probably tried to move them after the first one was hit. This is one of the few naval bases the Iranians have where, as you can see, there are many of the largest ships in their fleet. And Trump made this announcement that they destroyed 9 of them. So please, Madaluno.
But look, Mirko, right now I'm trying to understand what's going on inside Iran. Unfortunately, my sources aren't helping me much for reasons you can probably imagine. Some people are even trying to leave Tehran. But the question I'm asking myself is, you sink their ships, you destroy their air forces. Right now, there's probably Tom Cruise flying around trying to take down his old F-14 Tomcat. You destroy their air defenses. Perfect. Which wars are won only from the sky? I mean, Iran is a complex country. In these hours, we are seeing on social media or in our newspapers and newscasts images of people celebrating the death of Khamenei. Everyone happy, everyone pleased. Even when Saddam Hussein fell in Iraq, people celebrated, and when Gaddafi fell in Libya, people celebrated too. These are countries that now obviously shine with democracy, right? Like a Denmark, even better, a richer Denmark. So that's my first doubt. Let me plug this in for a moment, excuse me. And so in a country, Iran, which has extreme internal complexity, meaning there are factions within the power structure, like the faction of the religious leaders. We've always talked about it, the Pasdaran faction. We've always talked about it, the army, the Artesh, because the Pasdaran is clearly one thing and the army is another. The Pasdaran, in turn, are not just an armed group, they are an additional armed force. Yes, they have an armed popular militia, the Basiji, who pay salaries, especially among the most vulnerable classes of the urban population, have banks, they have oil service companies, they have airlines. The Pasdaran are an economic power that pays salaries and therefore buys consensus among sectors of the population. Then there are the religious leaders. The religious leaders have the bonyads, the foundations, which are financial holdings in addition to having support, especially among the rural population. So we shouldn't think that Iran is just that educated bourgeoisie from the urban classes who are celebrating the death of Khamenei. And in turn, not all of them are in favor of the return of the one my father, who's Neapolitan, calls Ozigerus. No, Ciro Pahlavi. Ozigerus is very popular among Iranians abroad. The educated Iranian bourgeoisie has emigrated. So every faction, if you put 3 Iranians together, they'll have 5 different ideas about the future of the country. And I'm talking about Persian Iranians, that is about 60%, correct me if I'm wrong about the percentage, of the 90 million Iranians who are ethnically Persian. Because then there are the Kurds who are very close to Israel. The Kurds have their own Kurdish agenda, as we know right now in Ankara. Some people are considering, in case the power in Tehran collapses, the possibility of boots on the ground in Iran. Rest assured that they are doing it because the Turks have already done it in Syria. These are not people who are afraid to do it. There are Turkic speakers, the Azeris who are well integrated into the Iranian power system. Khamenei was Azeri. But within them, there are strands of public opinion that support a pan-Turkic agenda. For months, especially during the Karabakh conflict, there were Azeris posting on social media pictures of the Grey Wolves salute, the Bozkurtlar salute, symbols of pan-Turkic nationalism. In Iran, if you make this salute, you end up in jail. And these people were posting themselves doing it. So that's an issue. There are other Turkic-speaking populations. There are the Arabs of Arabistan, some of whom have considered independence. It's a highly oil-rich region, so that's the Iranian quagmire. Why did I bore you with this geography lesson? Extremely boring, because I don't see an agenda for the future of Iran. Here, everyone is celebrating as if Khamenei died, and tomorrow Iran will become Sweden, actually.
I don't know if they've seen who the successor is.
who might already be dead.
Of the general, apart from that, the successor who might already be dead. But who have they decided to put, for example, in command of other forces? They are the ones who did it. The others might even be worse than the previous ones. They are the least moderate.
I mean, this strategy was described quite well by Andrea Gigli a few days ago on his social media channels. To turn on a light, attract the flies, and swat them all with a fly swatter. That is, to kill, to progressively decapitate all the leaders, as was done with Hezbollah, all the leaders of all the Iranian factions. So decapitate, 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 completely decapitate Iran to leave a country without a head. I don't know, is that a strategy? Who do you negotiate the end of hostilities with if there's no one on the other side? I mean, to me, it seems like a strategy of bombing. And then we'll see, unless the Americans really think about parachuting Ozi Charuz into Tehran. But I mean, okay, then he's the dumb son of a rich family, so they think he's ideal to have a leader they can manipulate. Okay, but what power dynamics does he have in the population? And the people who get their salaries from the Boneyard and the economic empire of the Pasdaran, will the Basij just sit there quietly? When the protests of the Syrian urban bourgeoisie against Assad broke out in 12, between 12 and 13, Assad's supporters took to the streets shouting, either Bashar or we burn the country. Syria has been burned. Every regime, even the most hateful, has a more or less strong base of support within itself. Let's keep that in mind. I mean, Pinochet lost when he held the constitutional referendum. 49 to 51, right? Subject to correction by Dr. Moro, so let's be very careful. I don't know if the enlightened leadership in Washington has considered these points this time. I know that the Arab countries, and I have the same confirmations as you do, Mirko, have begged Washington not to bomb Tehran. I'll leave you with this thought.
So we were talking about it, and I'll answer. Can we say that the war between the United States and China has started? No, China. Massimo took part to gain some information about the planes, do a bit of profiling, but he really didn't spend much effort. I'm taking this opportunity since Paolo and I discussed it earlier. Okay, it was an excellent intelligence operation. I think they used a bit of human, some people on the ground, and some signals intelligence. Surely Mossad and CIA agents have been infiltrated for a while, so they managed to catch the exact moment when Khamenei moved. And they had him available, which is why the operation started at a strange time. The problem is, but what's the end state of this thing? Because we know that the defensive ammunition of the Gulf countries isn't great and depends on the Americans. We know that submarines, etc., can only fire 3 or 4 salvos in terms of how many missiles they carry on board. They can't do more than that, so they can carry out a violent campaign that lasts at most a week. And then what do? Pack up and go home, mission complete like Bush, and leave the whole Middle East in an expanded war? Because unless something happens at the popular internal level, if that were the goal, so the end state, okay, there you've left them in a terrible state defensively, the Navy and so on, but that government still remains. In 10 years, they'll still be there rearming themselves, and it starts over and over again. I see it as a patchwork. You patch it up now, hoping that something will happen to bring Pahlavi or who knows who else. I mean, I don't see an end state. Paolo. And I believe that the Iranians are well aware that the Americans and Israelis can only carry out this operation for a limited time. Limited. So it's just as well to expand it and make them use up as much as possible, and let's say increase the level of stress also for their allies throughout the Middle East. What do you think?
First of all, good evening. Sorry for being late, but I was coming from Rai, where I'll be going back tomorrow morning, so I can't stay very long because I have to be there again at 5 in the morning. I would separate it into 2 groups. There is a part of the Iranian population, the one that celebrates the death of Khamenei, that hopes for the end of the Islamic Republic. That's the side we look at, and we only look at that side. We quantify it, we support it, at least morally. We still don't have an idea of its geographical distribution, if there really is this movement of let's throw them all into the sea. It's widespread throughout the country. It's present among all cultural and ethnic groups. As Amedeo rightly pointed out, we don't know a thing about it, but we're rooting for this, and up to this point, that's fine. However, we must remember that in an analysis, there are also those who wouldn't see it at its brightest. The idea that starting tomorrow, the system that allowed them to survive will no longer exist, once again, very well pointed out by Amedeo. And there's another matter. There's the idea that we think that within the power structure, which is an extremely complex and far-reaching structure of power, the idea of cutting off the head of the snake is a strategic nonsense. It's just something to say for a newspaper. There is no snake. Maybe, God, if you kill the leader of the seven dwarfs, you don't have the rest of the seven dwarfs anymore, but that's not how it works. But do you really think that an 87-year-old man with half a destroyed arm, who is under the watch of all the Western secret services to be killed, and he's probably afraid of being killed even by some of his own people, hasn't he thought about how the architecture, the geometry of power should be redistributed within the Islamic Republic? And there is proof of this. Where is the proof? The proof is in how Iran reacted. Iran is creating a masterpiece from a strategic point of view because they managed to do it while we can't see where the strategic line is, Israeli or American. Because you can't glimpse a thought that can stand on its own without a bottle of gin nearby, while instead the Iranian one is clear. It says, listen, we know that you can't handle it, as Mirko said, well, you can't handle it. A long, prolonged conflict, conducted essentially from the air, knowing that you can't afford the ground part of this conflict. I remember, for those who are nostalgic about geography, a few numbers. Iran is big, just to give you an idea. It's as big as Italy. I checked tonight. It's as big as Italy, France, Germany, and Poland put together. This is the area, it's a third of Europe, of the European Union, and it has 100 million inhabitants. And you think you can set up a government on a piece of land in Iran? Second point, no matter how angry you might be with the Ayatollah's regime, the shining examples you have in front of you of the West's restorative intervention of democracy, they are in order: Libya, where they're still shooting at each other; Iraq, where they never stopped shooting at each other, and the worst thing that happened there was ISIS. The Taliban, where you stayed for 20 years, dropped so many bombs on them that you lowered the mountain lines by 2 meters. And in the end, the Taliban are in charge. Syria. I mean, the prospect that Western intervention turns that country into a complete mess. It's not just a hypothesis, it's a fact that any Iranian can see. Third, but in your opinion, how long can it last in a proud, intelligent people, one of the most educated peoples in the world? They are third in the world ranking for the number of engineers or graduates in what they call hard sciences, that is, engineers, physicists, mathematicians. They're definitely not stupid, they're not wandering around with a camel. How long do you think any leader put there by whom? By the Israelis can last? I mean, by someone who's even from an opposing religion, or by the Americans, worse yet. I also remember that Khamenei is not just the leader of the revolution or the head of the Iranian state. He's the leader of the Shiites. It's like if you shoot the patriarch of the Orthodox Church in Moscow, it's like shooting the Pope. I mean, on top of that, he's a top religious authority in the Shiite world. And in certain segments of the population, not just in Iran, if you shoot the chief Ayatollah, they take it very badly. Maybe he's not the Pope, maybe he's a highly prestigious cardinal, but he's a religious authority who is recognized, revered, and supported by a large part of the population, who maybe doesn't care at all about his political side, but sees him as a religious leader of great importance. He's not a president, he's not Maduro, he's not that kind of figure. And that's another aspect to consider, because what do the Iranians do now? They say, I'm sure you can't afford a ground operation. I'm sure that if I start firing missiles at you left and right, I prove two things. That I can reach you, I can get to Jerusalem, I can get to all the countries that someone says I can reach, and maybe even more. So they don't protect you that much. The Americans don't have this absolute ability to protect you. Just so you know, we can get you if we want.
If the Americans leave on their own, they don't defend themselves that well.
As a soldier, the first thing I would try to do is target an aircraft carrier. Try to hit it, not saying to sink it, because that would be a huge feat, like something out of a fairy tale. Do you know when an American aircraft carrier last sank? In October of 42, the Hornet, which sank in the battle, I think, of the Santa Cruz Islands, so since 42. They haven't taken down an aircraft carrier. Imagine what the impact would be if an aircraft carrier was hit in a combat zone and put out of action even for 2 months. What would it mean, for example, for China's proxies, for Russia? The aircraft carrier is not just a ship. It has nothing to do with that. The aircraft carrier is a projection of power.
Paolo, excuse me, a question, Paolo.
It's a geopolitical statement. Here I am.
Excuse me, a question, Paolo. We have 13 American soldiers dead, 10 on the base in Kuwait and 3 on the others around the Gulf.
Yes.
But even if it were 3, even if it were just 1, there are the midterm elections.
And they know this in Iran too. Yeah, they know it.
All right, calm down, one thing at a time. They don't have the capability to strike aircraft carriers.
Let me finish this point. Targeting a ship of a certain level, I'm talking about an aircraft carrier, because that would be the most important target. But there are some pretty significant ones which are forced to stay there somehow, maybe with a little help for localization, maybe with a little help for missile guidance. Because, strangely enough, among Iran's somewhat distant friends are the competitors of the United States, like China and Russia. Maybe China could be tempted to find out if its missile guidance systems or other warfare systems really work in a combat environment against their presumed enemy without being the first to launch a missile themselves, for example. We're all talking about examples here. If we change the scale and consider not only the media impact, but also the internal impact in the United States, of having 150 sailors killed in the middle of the Indian Ocean because an Iranian missile hit you and you weren't able to stop it. Then you try to explain, as President of the United States, that you had the situation under control and had already crushed them. These people have entered into a war with let's say there's a 50% chance of winning it, but 50% isn't much to start a war with, especially if you're the one starting it. Putin started the war convinced he had an 80% chance of winning it, and look where he is now. Just to say, we have examples after all.
So from a technical point of view, Paolo, I'm telling you, all the analysts say there's no chance for them to hit an aircraft carrier. They're not able to direct those missiles because they don't really have the ability to see exactly where it is, to guide it. And while the missile is descending, it can't maneuver. They would have to use something else, and anything that gets close to the aircraft carrier, even if it's Chinese, gets pushed away. So they can't use proxies, they can't use a direct Chinese weapon, because that would be a direct war between China and the United States. They tried to shoot something, but it didn't even come close. It seems they damaged an American auxiliary ship, but there's no evidence of that, just some announcements. So their chances are very, very slim. Also because, as we've seen in all the bombings they've carried out, even in Qatar and in all the other places, it's not like their accuracy was exactly top-notch. If we also look at what happened at the various bases.
I'll add something else that doesn't move, another valuable target that doesn't move, and it causes quite a lot of trouble. Start thinking about what happens if they start hitting the gas terminals, not on the Hormuz side, but on the other side, which they can actually do. They start hitting your gas terminals, oil terminals, and even the extraction wells in the Red Sea. Let's call it that. From Bab el-Mandeb upwards, they start shutting down all of Europe for you. We basically live off that.
Yes, they don't do that because they would be wiped out too from that point of view.
But they've already been told that they're wiped out. The stupid thing.
Not the oil production.
That you tell a country at war what your strategic goal is, which is to wipe them out and replace their government. Clearly, as long as they have any power, they will oppose with anything, even with things they would never have used. It's the cat strategy. You've cornered it, and before you kill it, it tears you to pieces. I mean, if you wanted to do something, leave them a way out and maybe you could avoid it. But if I have to disappear, then I'll take you down with me. A missile in Oman, I'll start causing chaos everywhere. I'll start causing chaos in your own home.
Let Samson die.
It's an opinion. Let Samson die, but he didn't actually say he would die, huh?
I'm saying it. I don't really agree with this theory because the only thing they can save to rebuild themselves is exactly that. They need the oil industry. Otherwise, I mean, the long-term strategy. Okay, they give us a lot of blows, but we still have the oil industry because it's too tied to China to be touched. And with that, we rebuild ourselves. If they really hit a productive part of the Gulf countries, then yes, they will be annihilated, even in their ability to rebuild.
The Iraqis did it. The Iraqis did it, abandoning the...
They set it on fire, yes, but there was a ground invasion there.
Yes, it took a year to put them out, huh?
Yes, that's the problem. I don't think they'll do that because that's their only chance to rebuild, so they can't take this thing to the extreme. But a few drones, a few missiles in Bahrain, Qatar, etc., which still cause a lot of economic problems for these countries, without hitting them, obviously, the bases or where they refine liquefied gas, etc., that if they can afford it, they'll basically use the Gulf monarchies to put pressure on the Americans. If Trump really said they want to bomb for a month, here we should do more live sessions to assess what the American munitions capacity is for all these planes. I'm not so sure they can maintain the level of intensity they've had in these past 2 days for a month, unless they've brought stockpiles of missiles. Incredible. Also, because after a while they run out of valuable targets. There aren't that many in Iran. How many Tomahawks can you launch before you need to resupply? Here we see that Iran has hit something. These are satellite images of the Alias Salem base, and we can see that there is some damage. The problem when using ballistic missiles on such large bases is that it's hard to really damage them because they're truly enormous. You would need a lot. Cluster munition bombings are more effective than missiles, which in any case don't carry a huge potential. We saw it also in the Iranian responses last time to Israel. Many missiles, 26 impacts on an air base. Most ended up on the sides or concrete of the runway. Very little was actually hit. So realistically, this fan-shaped strategy of hitting a bit of everything, in my opinion, is more about communication. We can hit you, and when the Americans leave, you're on your own, and these people can't stay here to protect you forever. Daniele, this way will include you too. I know this is going to be a long live stream because there really are a lot of things to talk about. What are people in America saying about all this? What is the reaction to Trump? Is it true that everyone says, sorry, that yes, he didn't ask Congress for permission, etc., but actually neither did Obama with the other things he did? Obama had asked Congress for permission. He was bypassed, so it's not a precedent.
It's not a precedent. Surely the opposition, as expected, acts as the opposition, they say. We received very partial information on Friday, that meeting of the committee that you know about, an equivalent of the Italian caucus. So the gang of 8, 4 Republicans, 4 Democrats. Rubio told him, something is about to happen, but you know very well how Trump is. He decides at the last minute what to do. I confirmed that the attack in the morning was going to happen because they found out shortly before. It was originally planned for the night. They found out shortly before the attack that at dawn there would be a meeting of important leaders. In fact, they killed quite a few of them. Third thing, the controversy, even if it remains a controversy, as they say in Italy, in quotes, inside the palace, it concerns the fact that Trump has been attacking all the presidents or presidential candidates of the United States of America for 20 years, saying, you are the presidents of war, of World War III, Obama, then Biden, even Harris. Vote, American voters, vote for me, because with me there will be no war. Knowing Trump and knowing the dynamics of Washington, we can say that even this morning, if you check American websites, many Americans are saying, President Trump, you are very inconsistent, you are very inconsistent, but people tell you that every day. So actually, it's almost a formal observation in the sense that from a substantive point of view, if you look at the Maduro situation as well, as long as it was about going into Caracas and extracting Maduro and his wife, actually the American public was happy because it was a nice operation. He said he was going there for democracy, exactly like he's doing now with the Iranians. I'm coming, regime change. In my opinion, that's not the strategy. The questions that people who follow foreign policy in Washington are asking are basically, I mean, General Capitini would have been enough. There was no need to go all the way to Washington. To understand that when you start a war, you need to be very clear about it before you start it. What is the objective? If the objective is regime change, you've already answered it yourselves. I confirm your impression. Even before Christmas, Washington and the opposition in Iran had been analyzed, and it was determined that there is no opposition. The relative of the Shah of Persia, it's as if we in Italy had, I don't know, at the fall of the First Republic, Vittorio Emanuele IV would arrive, the son of Umberto II, he would come. It's a joke. Third, I also confirm the impression you had that the regime is really in serious trouble, the country is impoverished, there's no water and everything else. But it's not true that the regime has no support from part of the population. Then there's another aspect, the relationship between the United States and Israel. I'll give you 3 very brief pieces of information which I think help us understand my impression of how this situation might play out. First, intelligence. In Israel, there are between 200 and 250,000 Jews of Persian origin, either born in Iran or children of people born in Iran. Imagine being in a country where the intelligence is formidable. What is the current level of information that is known in Israel about Iranian society? We already saw it last year, we've seen it in previous years, but they would go around Tehran shooting at motorcyclists, taking out the one on the right and leaving the one on the left alone. That is the level of Israeli intelligence in Iran. From what little I follow these things, it's one of the best in the entire Middle East compared to other Middle Eastern countries. In Iran, in my opinion, the Israelis probably have the best intelligence of everything they have in the Middle East. Second thing, a couple of hours ago, maybe you saw it, Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv was declared closed. Someone might say, well, there are missiles. No, in my experience, even when Hamas was launching missiles from Gaza and so on, the airport itself wasn't closed. Flights were suspended. Why? Because Lufthansa, British Airways, and so on, the insurance companies wouldn't insure you anymore, so no one would fly their planes, but El Al still flew anyway.
I checked into this briefly so I can share a few details. Lloyd's will not renew maritime insurance because all ships are at extremely high risk. And other companies I can't remember. Anyway, I sent it to Mataluno. Do you remember? I sent you a whole list of companies today. They said, we're not insuring, forget about it, because it's 7 or 8% of the value of the ship. Just imagine that.
I was saying, because this news is really important, read it carefully. It's closed until next Friday evening, that is. Considering Shabbat and everything, it means Sunday morning, 7 days from today. What does it mean? Closing the airport also means closing El Al flights. There are hundreds of thousands of Israelis abroad who have to return through Taba, Egypt. And then by bus, you go up from Eilat. What does it mean? That they are expecting a much worse situation. I mean, it's no longer just the missile that could arrive like they did even today. It's something much, much, much more serious. One last thing, I have an impression, you see, third news, that 100,000 soldiers were called up today. calling up 100,000 soldiers to go where? To do what? Soldiers aren't pilots, General. Soldiers are soldiers. There's something going on. I'll give you a hypothesis. What is Netanyahu's goal, in my opinion? From what I know, I even met him in person a few years ago, Netanyahu. In my opinion, Israel's real goal isn't the elimination of the Iranian leadership. It's to resolve, let's put it this way, once and for all, the issue of atomic weapons and ballistic missiles. In my opinion, the Israelis might carry out a ground operation in certain specific parts of Iran. Let me remind you that 30 years ago, someone helped me with my terrible memory. In Syria, when the Israelis went in to destroy the nuclear plant, I think it was called Natanz. They even went in with soldiers on Syrian territory wearing Syrian army uniforms, the Israelis. I mean, something beyond imagination. So my impression is that Trump sold himself out, just like he did with Maduro when he went to Venezuela to bring democracy. The first thing he did was not only fail to bring democracy, he even took away the medal from the head of the opposition who had won because she was asking for democracy. Can you imagine how much Trump cares about democracy? But in my opinion, the Israelis have a different goal from the Americans. It's a more focused goal. And I think this time it's a goal they're going to act on. I mean, it's no longer possible to go on with, is there a nuclear weapon or not? This time, in my opinion, they're going there themselves in person.
It's tough, in my opinion, to do something like that. The Americans have tried. All the small missions we know about ended badly. Infiltration is extremely difficult. In that country, anyway, you see dozens of Dutch ships can't leave the Persian Gulf because of military tensions and the sharp increase in insurance costs as a result. They don't want to take risks. I don't want to pronounce it because it's impossible.
Excuse me, but aren't we here? Maybe it's a question I ask all the speakers in front of the good old law of Sun Tzu, that every extra hour of war is a disadvantage for the attacker and an advantage for the defender.
You're right. I think that's exactly what they're counting on. The article I mentioned earlier, but I didn't want to interrupt you, actually showed that many analysts are starting to doubt the defensive capabilities of all the Gulf countries, exactly because of something that had already caused a mess before. They had helped Israel a bit, even Jordan, just to say that it was hit and that it helped, but also because it hosts forces. But not, the supplies can't be infinite, and they mostly depend on the Americans. So Iran is playing, as you rightly said, the card of, okay, I don't target their money-making industrial system or they'd retaliate against us. But I make the whole situation extremely expensive. You have all the naval assets, so the insurance companies, the ship owners, everyone who makes a living from tourism in the Gulf, everything becomes extremely expensive. Now, hour after hour, the situation can only get worse. So, okay, they can keep destroying my military assets and killing the leaders, destroying anti-aircraft launchers, missiles, and so on. Invading us is impossible. They will probably contain any possible, let's say, internal uprising of those who are against it anyway and who are not the majority, from what is, after all, a system that gives out perks and so on. So it's not like everything suddenly blows up. If Trump really intends to wage a month-long war, gentlemen, go fill up your gas cans.
Which might actually please the tenant of the Kremlin.
He's the only one who profits from this. He's the only one who profits from this.
Russia will gain a lot from the rise in oil prices.
Also because of China.
But it really upsets the tenant of the Forbidden City.
Exactly.
Formula Alaska.
Because China is starting to run out of crude oil suppliers at this point. And
it's drying up for everyone, but the Chinese don't say a word.
Well, they acted this time, though. They even sent a spy ship. For example, it would be a shame if that ship hit, if it stepped on a mine or...
What a nice spy ship you have. It would really...
What bad luck. but I would take it out in a covert way. I would make sure that a little damage, because this time China made its presence felt. If what we perceived is true, that is, that anti-stealth radar forced the F-35s to take evasive maneuvers and use electronic warfare to defend themselves, and they had to abort the attack. If it's true the Chinese are there, they tried to provide support in the form of that ship, in the form of electronic warfare and anti-aircraft systems. And we don't know this for sure, but someone else does. Well, I think that someone wants to make the Chinese pay a price, to give the Chinese a little slap on the wrist. In my opinion, that would make sense from the American side.
Once the Americans took down an entire Chinese embassy. Oops, sorry, we had old maps.
In 99, when China was still largely an agricultural country and couldn't react, today China has stepped right into the game. And do we want to let them do it? I mean, if my daughter steps into the dish, I give her a dirty look.
I wanted to ask something, Leonardo, since the use of the B2 Spirit happened last night. I mean, early, let's say very early morning for us. The very fact that they had to speed up the operation and do it during the day because there was the opportunity to, it means that some targets that couldn't be dealt with by other aircraft had to be dealt with early in the morning on March 1st, bringing in the B2 Spirit, 4 of them, by the way. So it wasn't a massive thing. This means that they had to, let's say, improvise the beginning, well coordinated, whatever you want to call it, from a military point of view. Nothing to say about the perfect timing of everything that happened. But it means that for the long-term campaign, they basically had to improvise. At the time, the need for the Spirits to strike targets that weren't planned for. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense why they didn't do it at night and the B2 Spirits struck along with everything else. We notice movements of assets like the B2 Spirits and others that are happening right now, precisely because evidently they want to prolong the campaign. Do you remember a couple of months ago when the other attack happened? I say a couple of months ago because by now, after dealing with these things so much, everything seems extremely condensed to me. We destroyed everything, mission accomplished, and so on. Then it turned out that it was exactly like that.
Yeah, that's what they told us, but in reality, it lasted just a morning, believing what they bragged about on Trump's side. Because moreover, there were satellite photos, I remember, of trucks taking stuff away before the bombing. So in this case, the B2S didn't fly from Diego Garcia. Pay attention. Do you remember that Great Britain, well, was reluctant, had forbidden its use? But aside from that, an asset like the B2 moving to Diego Garcia is much more observable. It's visible to the adversary's satellites. Just like we did last year, they were all lined up, we knew it. Then the attack still started from the United States with a big deception operation. This time, same thing, they're flying from the United States for this operation. And I'd like to point out that the refueling planes used, the KC-46, were based at European bases in the Azores. When during the Greenland crisis, I said in our private group, but be careful, the United States also needs Europe for projection reasons. For bases, for logistics, for refueling, for repairs. The Rota base, the Rota naval base in Spain, is essential for rearming, for example, the VLS of ships. Just to name one, but then all the bases serve as bases. So you think you can manage without Europe? If Europe didn't exist, you'd have a problem.
I have to say goodnight to you, but I'll do it by confirming something you're saying, Leo, and that Mirko said a moment ago. The Arab countries, a statement has just come out from the Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC, saying that they reserve the right to respond. Hold me back or I'll hit him. Hold me, yeah. Hold me or else, are you holding me or else I'll hit him? I mean, really, it's like that. They reserve the right.
They are well aware of their limited interception capabilities and that they depend on the Americans. That if the Americans, as they usually do, pack up and leave, they leave you with the mess. Well, if Iran decided not to launch 20 drones and 10 missiles at Bahrain, but to launch 200, Fat chance someone was just asking.
The only logic you have, and that's been going on for far too long now, is let's use our fists. I mean, if we live in a world where international law doesn't even exist, not even as a pretense anymore, because at least Bush the younger saved face and kept up appearances. Now, not even that anymore. If the only logic is to use force, right? That American saying, correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Moro, if the only tool you have in your toolbox is a hammer, you'll treat every problem like a nail. That's it. At that point, though, you really need to know how to use your fists, and you have to be ready for everyone else to react the same way you do. Here, there's no more politics. There's no more politics. There's this idea that if I kill all the leaders of my enemy, it means there won't be a single one of them left to sign the peace. I mean, not even with the Nazis did they do that. I mean, with the Nazis, someone like Gehlen, you take him and put him in charge of the Secret Service of West Germany. You saved him. I mean, even with some Nazis, because you had to manage the situation. I mean, well, I'll leave you with this thought, guys. Good night.
Bye, Amedeo.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye, Amedeo.
Meanwhile, we're watching the wiretap.
Here are the wiretaps. I'm requesting 2 from the pack to give an idea. But we've seen a lot of impacts. I mean, if we divide the number of missiles that have been launched, the drones by country, these aren't huge attacks. And something has already arrived. It's worth noting that even though the Iranian aren't extremely precise, they still managed to hit some, let's say, symbolic targets. It's the symbolism of those targets that makes you realize, look, that if we want to ... and you depend on the Americans. So are you sure you want to give the Americans permission to use your bases? Because we will consider you complicit in this matter. And in my opinion, allowing the Americans for their geopolitical interests to wage this war, while you end up getting a direct response from us, and then you have to live with the consequences of the American action. Do the math for yourselves. I think that's the message the Iranians have sent.
I'll say this, then I'll say goodbye, because tomorrow morning I have to wake up really early. But it seems that no one has learned anything. Even poor Vladimiro 4 years ago, we're now heading into the 5th year. He said it was a matter of 15 minutes, 15 days. We'll handle it. We'll sort it out. And he said it knowingly. And it's been 4 years that he's been taking a beating and can't make progress in Ukraine. 4 years now, maybe he'll learn something, because now you have the President of the United States saying, don't worry, in 10 days we'll have this sorted out. Here's another one you'd want to say, but do you have a plan B? Do you have an exit strategy? If in 15 days, 20 days, things don't go as you say, can you handle the consequences you'll have domestically on a regional level? And less on a regional level. You don't want to have a situation where there's permanent chaos, because that way you can manage it a little better. That could also be in the idea of the White House, because if while
Of the White House or the Israelis, in the sense that
they knew,
the answer, I would say,
that's a good question.
The Israeli response can only be limited mainly to creating trouble, especially for the Gulf monarchies. It's not like by pushing Iran toward this kind of strategy, you automatically gain a lot of allies. For a sort of, let's say, final clash in the Middle East to see who will be the hegemon, because Iran is.
Of course, there are some aspects that need to be considered. That is, Israel has 9.5 million inhabitants, and that's a fact. It has an area that, compared to that of its competitors, is negligible. These are facts. They are elements of strength or weakness that you can't ignore. Of course, when you're big like Emilia-Romagna or a part of Lombardy, and you have over 9 million inhabitants, and around you there are 750 million people who are against you, you also have to start dealing with this situation.
Exactly, Paulo. It's much more convenient for Iran to start shooting at everyone than to focus only on Israel.
Convenient for whom?
For Israel. Divide the risk, divide the burden.
I keep seeing that Iran is simply saying, look, you have taken the wrong side because it doesn't protect you, because it can't do it and can't bear the load. Now let's see, I repeat, it seems to me like the beginning of a war played exactly like this, just hoping for the best. More for internal reasons in Israel and America than for any real need, someone has described Iran. Iran is now experiencing a drought, the deepest drought in the last 60 years. It has 42% inflation, oil prices are at a historic low, so having to sell and sell and sell, it barely makes a profit. Practically nothing, it's blocked by the stations at most. It's not exactly in great shape. There was no need to rush. I present them to you. An ultimatum where he says, okay, look, maybe we can even overlook the nuclear issue regarding the missiles. No, otherwise you might as well take our underwear. And at this point, we no longer exist. If I give you the missiles too, we simply don't exist anymore. We become Somalia, and you can't do that. So Iran is speaking to you, aware of its own weakness at this moment, and instead of continuing to say, you attack it.
Sorry, Paolo. Regarding what happened after the last attack, Iran during this period was laying low, as we say where I'm from.
But of course, then I'll get back to it. Some of the vital infrastructure was destroyed during the 12-day war. They also had bad luck on top of everything else. They weren't in great shape. I mean, I repeat, the operation could be called more Roaring Jackal than Roaring Lion, because it was already half dead as a thing.
Sorry, Paolo, the hard part. Last time it was okay. You sponsored all the proxies around us and so on. Trump understood that the Israelis were obsessed with the nuclear program. For 20 years, they've claimed they'd get the bomb soon, but it always seemed like empty promises to appease the Israelis. From the point of view of what the Iranians were doing after that attack, this is very unmotivated because there was no sign of any Iranian intention.
Unless the motivation is internal to Israel. Unless the motivation is internal to Israel, because Israel, we are at phase 2 of the Gaza phase, with Hamas still having all their weapons and occasionally firing at you. We are at phase 2 of the Lebanon pacification phase, with those from Hezbollah still there. We are at phase 3 with the Houthis, and the Houthis are still there. They're always at phase 2 or 3. But in the end, they haven't achieved even one result, not a single one up to today.
Do you remember the document from 10 years ago where they said, we win all the battles, but we can't manage to end the wars?
But they've started another one with this. Unless this kind of Israeli government actually needs another war. And it could also be useful for the Americans. By saying we're at war, they can reinstate emergency legislation. Because there's a war in Iraq or Iran, I can't do this. I can't impose tariffs. I can't act as if we're not in an emergency. We have 2 aircraft carriers there fighting. You see, no, here's what I mean. Excuse the simplification, given the time as well. Here's what I mean. The internal reasons of the moment and of the target.
You see, this is another problem. The Charles de Gaulle is moving in the Eastern Mediterranean because the French base in Bahrain was hit.
Yes, but
there's also a risk of escalation.
And it helps. It helps. Because the more people there are to handle the situation, the more people you have to get to agree. As you mentioned, eventually the targets run out. And in the end, if you want to get something done, you have to come here on foot. And when the question is you have to come here on foot. Nobody wants to come, nobody.
Unless the boots on the ground are put there by the Iranians themselves with an internal movement.
But that's up to the Iranians.
Which at the moment, however,
that's the Iranians. But the problem is that it's not that they want a democratic Iran elected by Iranians. That's not the goal. They want an Iraq where you can take a puppet like Reza Pahlavi, whoever he is for them, and put him in charge.
No.
Reza
Pahlavi is another Karzai.
Yes, that's the kind of thing, the Iranians, the day they decide to get rid of the Islamic Republic, they'll do it because they did it with the Shah. A people. I was saying tonight, if you're on top of the bull and the bull decides it doesn't want you on top anymore, it throws you off and you can do whatever you want. So you hang on to its ears then. But what we don't want is for the Iranians to decide who and what to put on. And it's obvious we've chosen the path they've chosen because we have nothing to do with it. They've chosen the path of bombing. But who would accept being liberated by a prime minister who was put in place by the head of an opposing religion and who has caused deaths? Come on, how long can that last? Honestly,
Unless the end state, which was my parallel hypothesis for this whole operation, isn't to change the regime, but simply to disarm, decapitate, break everything, create chaos, then I leave the mess to whoever comes after. Good, I solved the problem myself.
That's what Trump said. Take your freedom, we'll reduce them to a minimum to the bone. You have to take back your country.
yes, but even if that's the case, Iran, in its constitution as a country with thousands of years of history, even if you leave it with nothing, give it 10 or 12 years, it will return to being a regional power. You can't turn it into Somalia because it won't accept being Somalia. You can solve the problem like this at first, then they'll build themselves an air force, they'll recover. And if they ask, is there anyone who can help me do it? You'll see that some Chinese will show up. You'll see that some Russians will show up.
Wow, another one. Wow,
Show this video again, it's interesting.
This is the French base that was hit.
wow, another one. Wow.
But by what? Wow, a drone, what is it?
Wow, nobody knows. Another one.
Nobody knows.
Nobody knows. In the other videos, you can only see smoke.
This guy is thrilled and keeps saying, wow. I say goodbye. I say goodbye to Daniele, who is very far away. I also say goodbye to everyone, Leo and Mirko, and everyone who has listened to us until now. Forgive me if I said anything out of line. But the nice thing about this place is being able to say what you think while thinking about what you say. So I thank everyone.
First on television, so he ran from television.
I even have a tie. You've never seen me in a tie. Come on, here it is.
Beautiful.
Yes, but for other reasons. All right. Goodbye and have a good day.
Bye, Paolo, thank you.
Bye.
So Cristiano Cufini says, what does the USA gain from this operation, apart from what the hegemonic state of the Federation located in the Middle East gains? Some justify it as a way to remove an oil source, but they don't actually do that. That's the problem. If you target Iran's production capacity, they will do the same thing to those in the Gulf. And then a disaster happens, not just for them, but for the whole planet. Since 25% of the world's production passes through there, including liquefied gas and so on. Besides being practically the capital of all the OnlyFans creators and all those, what are they called, scam gurus, like, look how I made money in Dubai with a Bugatti in front of the pool. So it's quite a mess. I believe that the problem with the American end state is that in reality, it's an end state that serves what the Israelis need, not what the Americans need. I don't see any sense in operations like this. Unless you're strongly convinced and you've created an internal support network in the country that really starts to help those who want to do the toppling, that is the overturning of the situation. But if this overturning doesn't happen, you'll have an extremely expensive campaign lasting a month. If this is really what Trump wants to do, which will have enormous repercussions on the world market just to take away 10% of China's oil needs. This is only temporary, since selling is their sole income source and they won't stop. Honestly, I don't see much sense in an operation like this. I think they can really reduce their military capability to the bone, but in the end, people don't care about anti-aircraft systems or ballistic missiles. People have problems with the soldier with the K-47 in his hand, and you don't get rid of them by taking out bases, airports, things like that. You can't take that away from the regime. It's a bit like what happens in Venezuela. You can destroy those 4 old systems they have, 4 stolen shuttles, etc. But in the end, the people will still have to face the militias. And the leader who has come up now, talking about all these points, he also loses a bit. The one who has now replaced the head of one of the army sections is one of those who carried out attacks in 93, 94. I mean, it's even worse. So I don't know if, when you change everything, It's not certain that those who come out are more inclined, like what happened in Venezuela with Machado, to talk to you, to make agreements with you. Given the very ideological, religious nature, those who come out could be even more extremist. I don't know how convenient this is. This story at a time like this. Do you, Daniele, have any idea why? Within America, Trump has decided, I mean, I would have understood more if he had done something about Cuba, since he was supposed to take care of the American hemisphere, solve the old historical issues, and so on and so forth. Getting involved in a 1-month war in the Middle East, which isn't a punitive operation. The last time it was a punitive mission, Midnight Hammer. I do something specific to slow down your nuclear program, and then I leave. A month-long campaign like this can only end up turning into a regional war. And who wants this regional war? I don't think the Americans are very interested in it. Many of the bases have also reduced the number of personnel, like the base in Bahrain and so on. So yes, they did hit some military assets, but the number of people there was already quite low. The ones who will end up dealing with this situation will basically be the Gulf monarchies and Israel. And we also need to see what will happen with Turkey, because I don't think Turkey will like having millions of Persian refugees on its borders, unless, as usual, they end up using them, letting them pass through Turkey and sending them to our own borders. Rationally speaking, is there any aspect of this?
We'll be right there. Let's sum up the considerations you've made. Because in my opinion, by putting together the various considerations, you can come to some kind of explanation. About Cuba, I would like to remind your followers that you and I talked about Cuba a month ago. It's a ripe pear ready for Trump and for Rubio, who is of Cuban origin. At any moment, they could blow it up and take it home on a historical level. Because for millions of Americans, not just Republicans, but also Democrats, Cuba is a wound that has been there for 60 years. It's not just on the other side of the ocean and so on. It's right there in what we can call the backyard. In my opinion, he keeps Cuba, and I bet that a week before the midterm elections, he blows it up. He plays it on a media level. He doesn't risk anything. He keeps it by the neck at any moment, flips the switch and turns off the lights in Cuba. The real problem, if you look at it, is something else. 2 weeks ago, he gathered a number of countries, honestly, where I don't think many of us would want to live, like Kosovo, to create the famous Board of Peace for Gaza, which, if you look at American media now, is practically not being talked about anymore. He basically set up his own show, said he would rebuild Gaza, asked everyone to bring $1 billion each, and said he would continue to manage it even when he's no longer president of the United States of America. Just to confirm that when we analyze Trump, we often risk looking for explanations in a politician in the traditional sense of the word, but since he's not a politician, if we try to look for explanations, we often get lost because there isn't any real logic. He argued with the Prime Minister of Norway because they didn't give him the Nobel Peace Prize. Then he launched the initiative on Gaza. It ended up going nowhere. With poor Tagliani, who even had to go in wearing the red cap. I don't know if you saw him with the red MAGA cap.
Now he uses the white one.
But the real problem is actually the MAGA people. It's actually the MAGA people. The real problem for Trump right now, meaning the MAGA movement, which is a very serious thing, is the only real opposition to the Trump administration. In my opinion, right now, it's not the Democrats, it's the MAGA side, meaning the formidable side, from Tucker Carlson to Green and so on, who seem like extreme characters, a bit like Monday morning sports bar talk. But in reality, they represent the core sentiment. One of those who say one of the 5 groups into which the electorate that chose Trump is divided is a very powerful group, this MAGA movement.
Sorry to interrupt you. I also watch the things that happen I'm afraid that the Americans with this move are about to open a real Pandora's box. The American embassy in Baghdad is now under siege by the Iraqis.
Yes, but excuse me, this morning a consulate was also attacked. I think it was American. In Pakistan, there are images of the assault. I think it was attacked right in Pakistan, by the way.
There's a risk that the Middle East will really get fed up.
They hit me, they hit me. Mirko, if you can recover the footage from this morning, something struck me. They managed to get in without practically any kind of protection or resistance, as if there was a sort of, as happens in these cases, collusion, even on the part of the law enforcement who should have protected. No, let's stick to the point about MAGA. The point about MAGA is phenomenal, in the sense that as long as it's the Democrats saying they didn't inform us, it was Congress. But rightly, even Lanzara, you were saying here, history books are full of United States presidents who go around bombing places in the world without asking anyone for permission. No, the problem with the MAGA movement is a serious issue. Even regarding the Venezuela situation, the MAGA movement didn't want to intervene because they said, we are isolationists. He sold the story about the backyard, but then he went and bombed Nigeria. Mirko, for those who follow your channel, I remind you that the new Trump administration intervened militarily in 7 countries around the world in 1 year. 7 countries. So it's not even isolationist. And why is the debate within the MAGA movement so remarkable, Mirko? Because you jump 3 days from today, skip 3 days, go from today to next Wednesday. Let's say, God forbid, there are 15 to 20 American soldiers. Here it is, 15 to 20 more American soldiers dead.
American consulate in Pakistan.
And in Pakistan. Exactly, I saw it this morning, but if you look at all the protection, here it is on the left, you can see it's significant protection. The fact that you managed to attack the American consulate in Pakistan with practically no protection at all, it means that someone looked the other way when they went to attack it. And it's, as you say, just the beginning then, this internal situation within the MAGA. Give it 3 days and there will be an increase of 15 to 20 American casualties. Someone, not the Democrats in the opposition, someone in American public opinion is starting to ask themselves what you are asking me tonight. But you, President of the United States of America, what do you want from Iran? While I insist on one point, and in my opinion, General Capitini, in my opinion, got it right. When it is suggested that for Netanyahu, this situation, this new war in Iran, is the continuation of the response that Israel is giving to the Hamas attack from Gaza. So since 2023, that Netanyahu basically responded by razing Gaza to the ground. The participation of Hezbollah, always supported by the Iranians, left 1,200 Hezbollah fighters and forced Israel to carry out an operation. That one day they'll make a movie about these searchers, 1,200 fighters in the name of Allah, and turned away. The Houthis basically don't move anymore. In my opinion, Netanyahu saves himself at this point because there are elections coming up in Israel. Careful before the American midterm elections, where as usual Netanyahu either wins or goes to jail. Careful, we're always dealing with politicians who are in between. I'm the most powerful man in the world, or as they say in Rome, off to jail. Netanyahu has a problem. He has to show the American public that he has been defeated in a sensational way. 3 years ago, when a group of guerrillas broke through Israel's borders, in 30 different places, in 30 different places, the borders of the state of Israel. He has to prove not only to the Israelis, but also to the history books that it's true he wasn't able to handle the first part of the situation, but this time he's getting straight to the point. For me, the Israelis are somehow going on the ground, but they're not going on the ground to change the regime. On that, it seems to me that everyone here tonight agrees. It's impossible to change a regime and it's extremely dangerous. You started by mentioning Syria, Iraq, Libya. Changing a regime, especially when it's in the hands of American politicians, no matter which side they're on, almost always leads to trouble, to disasters. We Italians, in our own small way, I was there in the days when Obama gave the green light to Sarkozy and that other unpunished guy from London. When we Italians told them, be careful because Libya is an extremely dangerous place, where you need to work for a transition from Gaddafi to some sort of evolution of the dictatorship after Obama and Clinton. Because we always speak badly about the Republicans, but we must always remember that the worst problems in American foreign policy are usually caused by the Democrats, not the Republicans. Because traditional Republicans tend to be more cautious, more isolationist about this. The problem is that Trump is not a Republican, Trump is not a Republican, Trump is Trump. So following his logic always becomes dangerous, in my opinion. That's why I have the impression that this situation will go on for a long time, but on a military level it will continue, though not as a regime change.
Yeah, but I follow your reasoning, and I think that regime change isn't, yes. If it happens, if it comes from Iran, fine. But if it doesn't, oh well, they want to wipe it out. And as Mirko said some time ago in a private conversation, the Americans have had it in for Iran since '79. No, because the Shah's Iran was the main ally of the United States in the Middle East. A terrible regime, illiberal, violent, repressive. It wasn't Benghazi, but he was our son of a so it was convenient for us. The Americans had him removed, and they've had him here since '79. Iran has been under sanctions since 1979. When Saddam went to war with them, the United States supported Iraq, not excessively, not openly. But they gave them all the intelligence sources, they mainly provided information, they didn't arm them in any significant way, they didn't expose themselves too much. And Iran, yes, now the United States maybe really wants to settle things with Iran because they've been dealing with them for 50 years, 45. To this, we add that Iran also has resentment towards the Gulf countries, towards the Gulf monarchies. Why? Because Saddam, when he waged war against them, took money from whom? From Kuwait, from Saudi Arabia, from the Emirates, who did not fight directly with Iraq, did not send weapons or men, but sent money. One excuse after the war ended was that they wanted their money back. And one of the excuses, one of the reasons why Saddam invaded Kuwait was precisely to avoid having to pay them what was owed. So at this point here, this map shows us what was hit on both sides. I'm afraid that here the end state is not as sophisticated as we think, like regime building, but rather regime destroying. We have to smash it, and then whoever survives will see. Who cares?
I have an alternative theory in the sense that Israel knows very well that it can't win a war against Iran. It doesn't have the capability, the manpower, it's confined, so it can't. It can also keep destroying something from time to time, etc. But it will never be able to close that game. That score will always remain open. You know, I'm one of those people who thinks, as Andreotti used to say, thinks badly, but often gets it right by thinking badly. The only real way to solve the Iran issue is either through internal matters, which is extremely difficult, or by expanding the conflict, taking advantage of Iran's weaknesses. And what are the weaknesses of someone who is extremely ideological and religious? Every time they are attacked, they have to show others. It's the tough guy attitude that they are able to respond because the regime relies on its credibility to retaliate. Also for matters of pride, and if you force them to respond even just for matters of pride, because the attacks they've carried out in Qatar and elsewhere are still symbolic attacks, since the damage is actually very small. Well, since that's his only way of responding, I force him to respond exactly in the only way he knows how to respond. And that way is the one that leads everyone else to join the fight against Iran. Because now we're at a superficial level. Iran, for reasons of pride, strikes a little. To show that, look, it's not worth it for you because the Americans started, then they leave, and you're left with the problems. But if the strategy, mainly Israeli, in my opinion, is to push them to do what they do, and these people get everyone involved, and when we're all at war with them, then it becomes unsustainable.
It could be a lot.
At best, Iran suffers some damage. I mean, I don't see a losing scenario for Israel in this situation. In the best case, it gains hegemony over the Middle East with all the states that it's not like they looked at it very favorably. Beyond the Abraham Accords, they would still find themselves very aligned against Iran. In any case, it takes home all the damage inflicted on Iran. In the best case, it creates a permanent anti-Iranian coalition, which really starts to cause problems. That is, there is no losing scenario, even considering the political one, obviously, for Netanyahu, who we know very well needs to fuel crises or reopen battles. Also, because here there's nothing left to fight over. And so the problem of elections, of internal issues, is postponed to a bigger conflict, a bigger crisis. Why are the Americans doing it? Maybe because it's a moment of opportunity. Let's remember that Iran was in the great list of countries together with North Korea, Libya, Afghanistan, Iraq, and so on. Since the time of the Wolfowitz Doctrine, the long-term objectives have always remained the same. It's interesting to see if they're really making them react this way, because they know they'll react this way, and this way is counterproductive. Because defending the flag is one thing. I attack you, I show you, and internally I sell it as a major attack. I imagine there will be videos coming out of F-35s as big as oil tankers being shot down, or nonsense like that. I don't know if you've seen the videos. How many artificial intelligence videos from the Iranian world have ended up on the internet of destroyed aircraft carriers? God's wrath is coming out. Go take a look, because they're really ridiculous. Planes launched from ships, things like that. A huge production of artificial intelligence videos showing Iran destroying aircraft carrier after aircraft carrier after aircraft carrier, and that works internally. I'm afraid of this. A strategy like this, which opens a war in the Middle East, is not limited to exchanges between two countries, Israel and Iran, but it involves the whole region. You know where you start, but you don't know where you'll end up. And even seeing the Iraqis storming the American consulate, the Pakistanis, who have always historically had good relations with the Americans, and they owe them a lot, even from an intelligence point of view. This shows that even the Iraqis would rather not see the Americans involved in the Middle East against Iran, with whom they fought a war and used gas on each other, rather than the Americans. I mean, let's realize this. The Iraqi prefers the Iranian, with whom they fought a war, over the American. This says a lot about the mindset of these countries and their people. It also doesn't help Trump, who recently said he doesn't like the new president of Iraq or something like that, so he's not helping either. Cristiano Cuffini, foreign policy in the Middle East can be summed up by the fact that no state can arise that could challenge Israeli power. In that area, actually, there isn't a state right now that challenges Israeli power. Iran, beyond all the talk you hear, Iran has never had the capability. It has always used proxies to bother Israel, to fuel the flames near Israel. On its own, it didn't put in much, some intelligence, a few men, some support, some money, but very few actual Iranian men. And here the proxies have run out, and when they ran out...
By the way, wait.
Do you start waging war directly?
Wait. We forgot that the Houthis said they would start attacking ships in the Red Sea again. We forgot about this. With what? I don't know.
Fire.
Here, another doubt is that the Americans will do what they did with the Houthis. I mean, they bombed. We talked about it here on Parabellum. I said, but this is an undeclared war that's been going on for a month. They've been bombing these guys for a month. At one point, Trump said, we have an agreement. And that was it. I wouldn't want something like that to happen in Iran. They bomb. At some point, they'll hit something, true or not, and they'll say, we're good now. The regime building, the new regime. Who's talking? We're good now, we're pulling out. I wouldn't want them to do the same thing, because Trump has a bit of a tendency to leave things unfinished. But even in Venezuela, he took Maduro, but then it's not like much changed. In Venezuela, it seemed like something big was going to change. On a political level, everything stayed the same for me. He has a bit of a tendency to leave things unfinished. Maybe Iran could end up the same way. I'm just guessing.
Question for you.
The Triton.
Good job, Manuel, for reminding us.
We mentioned it at the beginning of the live stream. It seems it's pretty much confirmed that the Triton was lost, and I speculated I don't know if Mirko has better sources, but I believe Chinese electronic warfare had a hand in it. The Triton, for those who don't know, is a large high-altitude reconnaissance drone. I don't know if Mirko has better information. The only thing I know is that it might have been lost due to Chinese electronic warfare. I'll stop here.
These are the only things that have come out. By the way, one of the few videos circulating from the Iranian side, which aren't fakes made with artificial intelligence, actually concerns the Triton.
Yes, it could have fallen, Manuel. I mean that it was affected by electronic warfare, because if it was heavily jammed, it could have lost the signal. So, well, they might have even shot it down somehow, that's what I meant. Then, earlier, our followers were talking about the sinking of aircraft carriers. We talked about it too, the possibility of sinking aircraft carriers. This is a very broad topic. If you want, we can talk about it, Mirko, you tell me. But as we wrote here too, it's not exactly easy. Well, but I don't know if it's the right time to talk about it then. If needed, we'll move on.
But in the meantime, if this story goes on, we'll have a chance to come back to technical issues, etc. Keep in mind, we had to condense one. You'll really find 150 sources on everything we've said. And I'm definitely forgetting something because I included the maps, the timeline of all the events, the statements, analysis on how Khamenei's death probably happened. From the intelligence point of view, I included satellite photos of the affected government buildings of the Iranian Ministry of Intelligence Palace. In fact, today they hit other things again. There are the first declassified Israeli images showing the destruction of radar systems and launchers. There are obviously images related to the Iranian ships and all the satellite comparisons. There's the downing of the MQ-9 Reaper. There are the new attacks. There are the roots of the B-2 Spirit, the Black Tomahawk. See, we were forgetting something, the PRSM.
Here too, but just to say a few words, the Precision Strike Missile, PRSM, is the successor to the Attack MS. And it's an object that, in its very first version, entered service in the United States with the Army. I believe in 2023, and it seems it had its baptism by fire precisely with this operation. So it's a missile then, of the ballistic type, in any case with a semi-ballistic trajectory, that is supposed to do the job of the attack miss. However, with a range in the increment 1, so with the first version of 500 kilometers, a later version is planned. Actually, as far as I know, there are 5 increments. The 5th increment should reach a range of 1,000 kilometers, if I remember correctly. But anyway, that's roughly how the increments should go. And a range of 500 kilometers means that, well, the Attack MS does 300 kilometers, so it has, let's say, 200 kilometers more range, increment 1. And it seems that it was used here for the first time. And it also seems that a first battery of this missile has been deployed in the Philippines. Not by chance, because having a range of 500 kilometers is useful in that area. Yes, in fact, I was quickly looking for a reference about the Philippines. I could be wrong, but if I remember correctly, it seems that a first battery was deployed there. That's it, just to give an element of novelty that this war is bringing.
Yes, obviously 500 declared, then usually the Americans, unlike the Russians, tend to declare less than what they actually do.
So for increment 1, the range is 499 to comply with the missile non-proliferation agreements. Well, the Russians do it too, and we Europeans do it as well, for example, with the Storm Shadow and so on. Then yes, it's true. They may have declared something false, but in this case, I tend to believe it for legal reasons. But you see, they're already working on a longer range system, so at some point in our time. Just as the START treaty for the reduction of nuclear weapons between the superpowers has expired, just as the INF treaty has been completely abandoned, all the rules are being broken, all international law is being disregarded. Well, someone said it's not mandatory to always respect it. Everything is falling apart. This limit of 500 kilometers for missile non-proliferation will also be broken.
Someone is asking if Russia is losing another ally amid all this, which Russian military blogs are also debating. You use the exact phrase. They say, we've lost Venezuela, we've lost this one, who's next? They're making bets. They're asking a lot about this situation. Final thoughts with Daniele, because as you have seen, this story, as Trump says, will continue. So I'm curious to see where they want to go with this. Surely, if you need to continue, it means that the attack you made wasn't fatal. It was preparatory. Going to get Khamenei, opening some corridors of Sadr, destroying a few targets. But if you have to make it this long, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, it means that the Israelis have declared that they have a list of 1,000 targets and 500 have been hit in these days. But it means that you still have a lot in mind today. These are the things that happened today. They hit the intelligence building. And there's still more they want to do. And again, the government factor. So as we can see, there's still a lot to do. If they still have paying targets, then the only thing left is to really strike other areas in a widespread way. There have been a few attacks in Israel, but honestly, it wasn't much, not even in Jordan and so on, let's say. The ones that made the most news were the tower in Dubai, the airports in Kuwait, and so on. The radar tower, the radar that was at the American base, which they say is worth $1 billion, it's not exactly like that. The early warning radar.
But did they hit it?
They hit it.
Oh no, because I missed it.
Hit right on target, but it was already mostly emptied of personnel. There are already satellite images. You can see the before and after. You see, we have plenty of topics and sources. It's even hard to connect them all because anyway, I don't think it's that essential within this huge discussion. Whether the American radar was hit or not, it will definitely cause problems with detecting and intercepting Shahed. So why try to blind the Americans in an area like this? If you don't intend to carry out further attacks, do you want to limit their capabilities for any possible future retaliation? Everyone obviously tries to say it in a much more limited way, but they also try to do something that is preparatory for future attacks. I would conclude with you, Daniele. You will find all the sources if you want to browse through them.
Then,
What is expected tomorrow from the Americans? I imagine there's a lot of talk about it.
very good. So, in addition to what you were saying, it's proof that Trump has a problem with American public opinion. If you look 3 hours ago, he made a statement, an interview with The Atlantic, saying after the blow we dealt to the Iranian leadership, a group of Iranian leaders immediately contacted me to try to reach a compromise. Since all of us, I think by now, have understood Trump's psychology, in reality, he was saying, I scared them and they acknowledged it. I mean, they want to talk to me, but he adds in the interview, told them that it's not the right time. But the message is, I'm trying to bend them, exactly like I did in Venezuela. That is to find a part of the leadership group that survived Khamenei with whom I can come to an agreement. So I, Trump, absolutely realize that I can't make a regime change. I, Trump, realized that a month and a half ago, I told millions of Iranians in the streets, fight, we're coming to free you. Just like democracy, human rights, and so on had done in Venezuela. But when it actually happened, it turned out that this wasn't the real issue. In my opinion, the proof of this is the interview he gave 3 hours ago to The Atlantic, where he basically admits, I realize I can't drag out this war for many days, while the Israelis can and they must. If you look at the statements of even the critical politicians from the Israeli opposition, the opposition stands with Netanyahu on this point. That is, the problem with Iran is, you were saying earlier, oh, they came to power in 79, they broke with the Americans, the Shah. And of course, I was there the first time I went there, right after the fall of the Shah, I arrived in Israel. At that time, Israel, which had historically always received oil from the Iranians, was so heavily embargoed by the other Muslim countries that it had to import oil. Just think from Mexico. There wasn't a single country in the Arab world or the Middle East willing to sell oil to Israel anymore. Israel was hit in an incredible way by the fall of the Shah. Let's not forget that for 60 years, this regime has said it doesn't consider Israel a state worthy of existing, so it calls it the Zionist entity and so on. And let's not forget what we said before, that 200 to 250,000 Jews living in Israel are of Persian origin. There are people on the right, on the left, above, below. I mean, it's not just those who support Netanyahu, it's the Israeli society that's speaking. We can't live every day with the risk that he might send a missile at us, because he believes we cannot exist as a state in the Middle East. So, in my opinion, the destinies of the two attackers split. I think the American one splits off. Trump will pull out as soon as he can, in my opinion. He'll cover their backs, but he'll pull out. He can't hold up with American public opinion if he has casualties in the next few days, since you are the experts and I'm not. To cause American deaths, whether it's attacks on consulates, embassies, or terrorist attacks around the world, it doesn't take much. You don't need some big organization to hurt the Trump administration. And the world, MAGA is there with the rifle aim to tell him, you did the opposite of what we voted you for. And it depends, because nobody is talking about it tonight. Rightly so, the whole Epstein affair, which here in Italy we say is just a sex scandal and so on. But Trump knows that it's an issue that can't be brushed off with a few jokes or by pretending to change the subject in American public opinion. In my opinion, he can't keep up with a conflict in the Middle East.
Well, gentlemen, in my opinion, this story goes on. While we're talking, videos keep coming out, like in Iran, they hit the depot in Erbil. So, gentlemen, just keep following. We'll see what happens in the next few days. Tomorrow, I'm leaving for Rome, and I'll be back. I leave at 8, and it's midnight. So let's hope nothing crazy happens. I thank everyone who followed us and the guests. You'll find a ton of sources. Over time, more precise satellite images of what's happening will come out, because obviously there's more attention from the Western side. For example, of the 9 ships declared by Trump, we've seen 3, the other 6 are unknown, and we don't know what happened to the submarines, what they are, class, kilo, or a variant.
Yes, they are 3 kilo class. Diesel electric ones that could also operate towards the Arabian Sea in search of the famous aircraft carrier. And there, perhaps the threat to the aircraft carriers comes more from underwater than from the air. Because I remember that in several exercises carried out years ago, it already happened that diesel electric submarines surfaced within torpedo range of the aircraft carriers just to be seen. It also happened with a Chinese submarine a few years ago. That's the information you can find here, for example. Then there are 15 Gadir, which are small mid-jet submarines for laying mines, carrying out ambushes in shallow waters, perfect for the Strait of Hormuz. But of course, American combat units stay away from those waters, from those shallow waters. The 3 kilo are dangerous. I fear them quite a bit. Carrier strike groups know how to defend themselves and often have an attack submarine as well. It's a long story anyway. Yes, the 3 frigates, Babo and the rest, which is a bit more dangerous.
Surface ships aren't very relevant. They would have been hit with nuclear weapons hundreds of kilometers away anyway. They couldn't have done anything. It's the smaller boats that are more problematic in the Strait of Hormuz, since they could cause a major mess.
Even for civilian traffic, because we're talking about blocking the Strait of Hormuz, the Iranians have all the tools they need to wage an asymmetric war in this case.
And anyway, even if something crazy happens tomorrow, we won't do a live stream tomorrow, or if it happens the day after, it takes time to gather everything and so on. I've sent you a lot of things in the sources, especially in terms of the timeline. That way you understand who did what, with what, when, and what the response was, because I understand it. On the news, they show you the hotel exploding with a drone. They talk about the dead, but you don't really understand. Yes, but when they did it, was it yesterday, last night, this morning, and so on? There's a whole timeline when these things happen, and there's a military criterion for targeting, for priorities, and so on that need to be explained. Maps, in my opinion, explain things better than anything else, because a map is intuitive when it comes to the legend. So at the beginning, you'll find a nice package of sources that says maps to understand and timeline, and there you can go and see without having to read. Who knows what huge thing? I think if someone is exactly interested in knowing how the Black Tomahawk work, you're interested in knowing where they started from, what they started from, and where they arrived. That's the information. By the way, lately an analyst I follow a lot has also resurfaced. His name is Joe Meany of the West. He makes really amazing maps packed with details, with a nerdy legend. For those who want to understand, you see, these are the Tomahawk supplies of the American assets. So if you know they have this many and can launch this many, you subtract the ones that have been launched, and you can more or less understand how repeatable this action is. As you can see, there are still quite a few left.
By the way, it's possible that there's at least one Ohio-class SSGN submarine, so it's a nuclear submarine, not an SSBN, the ones with nuclear missiles GN, so it launches guided missiles. If I remember correctly, it has 108 Tomahawks, but I could be wrong, it has about 100 or something like that. They replaced the Trident missiles with Tomahawks in the launch tubes, and that one can launch quite a few.
Thank you all, gentlemen. See you soon, because unfortunately this situation isn't over yet.
Unfortunately,
Good night.
hi.